Welcome to the Belisario Sonic YouTube channel, and today another edition of Jazz Nerds. And today, the great topic of New Orleans.
We're heading down to the Big Easy, ladies and gentlemen, where it all began. I would posit that without New Orleans, we would not have jazz. That is really the birthplace, the cradle of this great music that we love. I mean, let's just get into it. Let's go back to the beginning. And by that, I'm going back as far as 1817, around then, because that's when they allowed this thing to happen in Congo Square, where under the Napoleonic Code, the slaves were allowed to gather on Sundays and on other Catholic feast days. So they go to Congo Square, and they play a lot of the indigenous music.
A lot of percussion.
A lot of percussion. A lot of the same hand drums in Africa they had in Congo Square. And so they do these spiritual songs. They would sing, they would dance, and they had this thing called a ring shout. So you'd be dancing around to the drums, and then you'd shout out. So that is really where the whole idea of the second line began. And again, it's so far back, people don't realize just how far back that it goes. But yeah, Congo Square.
And then that would feed into a lot of the music in the cotton fields that would be outside of New Orleans,
right,
where you had a lot of the blues development. And it's kind of more of a complicated, it's kind of a gumbo.
That's a good way to put it,
right? Because you had this African American influence that started from that, but you also had the Creoles, who saw themselves as different, and they had their own influence, and then you also had the Caucasian influence too that would quickly get in the mix.
That's right. A gumbo is the best way to put it. You had a Caribbean influence as well. You had the French, you had the Spanish, and ultimately, what happened is in around 1900 or so, there was a guy named Buddy Bolden. King Bolden.
Right.
And he was the first performer to take this music that was evolving and turn it somewhat into ragtime.
Yeah.
Like if you listen to those old songs, it has a very ragtimey feel because it's incorporating the dancing that was happening and the marching, and he's bringing brass into the equation.
Right, and he's basically a brash, very, they call him a very loud, and some people call him obnoxious because they said that if he blew his horn, you could hear it blocks and blocks away. And he would do cutting contests between another popular band at that time and try to steal away the people. And more often than not, he would actually win these cutting contests because of the brashness and he's somewhat of a performer where he really was able to grab people's attention.
Yeah. Let me say one more point about this that Wynton Marsalis talks about. And we can't talk about New Orleans jazz without bringing in Wynton, but King Bolden, he developed this style called the Big Four, and basically, typically jazz. It's like that, but New Orleans jazz has an accent on the end of the four, so it might be
right, and it gets that syncopation now.
So that's where that began. But it's incredible how far back this stuff goes.
Right. But it really didn't get integrated into all of this. And Bolden lived he was born in 1877. Lived to 1931, but as we know, in 1907, I believe he's mentally ill and gets put in the mental institution.
Old
That's
St.
it.
James and
He's
Furry,
gone.
is that it?
He's gone. I don't know if it was, but yeah, he was gone. But another guy that comes along at the same time that knew Bolden was Kid Ory, who was Creole, and he would make the slide trombone very popular, tailgate style.
It was a trombone, and that's what
we're
listening to
right
now.
In the background right here.
And I have never heard this album, so this is a treat.
Yeah, Kid Ory plays W.C. Handy, and of course W.C. Handy is the father of the blues, who came and wrote all these songs that became very influential on New Orleans jazz, because you can't really camp jazz without the blues either.
Right.
But so Kid Ory was born in 1886. And so he actually knew Bolden and ran into Bolden before Bolden got locked up. He was young when he ran into him, but didn't return to New Orleans until later on. But that's a pretty interesting story
that
as well.
really is, and I didn't realize how far back Kid Ory went.
Yeah, it didn't become
was at that
popular
turn of the
until
century
later,
period.
or as far as recording goes, because recording
They didn't have it
was
back then.
didn't have it. And
Yeah.
that's another important point with New Orleans Jazz is the original Dixieland Jazz Band, which
Yes.
would make the first recording, I think, in 1917.
Yep, it was 17, and they were called the original Dixieland Jazz Band, JASS at first, and then they switched it over, I believe, in 1918. But that is actually a really good segue to the song I was going to refer to this week, and that's Tiger Rag. So they released it on that album, and there was a lot of talk if the writer was really Jelly Roll Morton. There was some controversy over where this song began. As it is, what I found was that it's copyrighted to Nick LaRocca, I think it is, and he was one of the players in
Right.
the original Dixieland band.
Yep. And of course, Jelly Roll Morton, even though he was pretty much ragtime, he started getting into that improvisation to a certain extent. Not quite as what Louis Armstrong would develop, playing with King Oliver, who was
Oliver, that's
another one of the
big
big
name.
bands that Louis Armstrong would play with, and then the Fletcher Henderson band. And that's where Louis Armstrong would start coming up with these
Yeah, this was in the 20s, man. Is that
solos.
right?
I think in the 20s,
In
yeah.
the 20s, yeah.
Because
yeah.
the Hot Fives, which would be really, this is really where you hear the first improvised recording of somebody playing really improvised solos.
Oh, wow.
Really,
So
one of
that's
it
it.
would be the Hot Fives.
Oh, that's
and then the Hot
incredible.
Sevens as well. But yeah, this is one of the earliest examples of jazz improvisation, at a higher level. It's always been
Yes,
there, but
yes.
not to this like this.
Let me on that note. Do you think the improvisation evolved out of the funeral processions? Because the
that's-
brass bands were playing, and they'd get a second line following in, marching along rhythmically. And I think a lot of the musicians went outside the box based on the dance, based
Yeah.
on the marching around.
good
So
point.
they developed these riffs. And it didn't happen overnight, but yeah, Louis was the first to really lay that down. And this is around the time jazz is starting to spread and become mainstream, because you get a lot of these groups, they're playing their music on these riverboats. The riverboats are
that's
going
it.
up to St. Louis,
Yeah.
and then it's spreading
Work
around the
camps.
country. Work camps, that's
Up
right.
and down the river.
Yeah,
All those,
yeah.
which is where Kid Ory started playing. In his town that was about, what was 25 miles outside of New Orleans. It's probably part of New Orleans now. But that's where he started playing, and then up and down the river, and then eventually to New Orleans.
Nice.
And then another trumpet that I wanted to mention, because he's often forgotten, was Bunk Johnson, who played
Yeah, that's
with,
an obsolete name, but
really also started doing the improvisation, but his recordings again are kind of, there's some around now
Yeah.
that you can find that have been reissued. So, but he's another one I think that doesn't get his due. And he was born in 1879 and died in 49. So he was there towards the earlier part of the jazz tradition.
going way
there.
back.
Yeah.
Yes, but it was Louis who really broke out with the big hits.
Yeah.
I'd say he was the first mainstream, somewhat well-known name for jazz, not just in New Orleans, but the country.
Right. And one other record that I wanted to pull out and talk about was the Sidney Bechet, I think is how you pronounce his name.
Man, you've got all kinds of great
This,
surprises here, man.
Would be your earliest saxophone player that would start
Wow.
the improvisation. And so, yeah, this guy.
That is great. And look at that. Hold that
Yeah,
album
I
up again. Look at this. It's this kid getting into the jelly and who knows what.
And he's was born in 1897, Bechet, and played to 59. So again, he's part of that early tradition as well. So I think a lot of these guys kind of get overlooked.
Yeah. This is one I'm not familiar with at all. What does he cover? Sweet Lorraine, Lazy River, China Boy, 4 or 5 times. That's a plenty. Yes. Man, great stuff.
And then I just wanted to point out my favorite. Probably this is the first jazz album I ever listened to ever. This is what the first one I bought. I bought it on actually CD. But this is the first jazz record that I ever purchased. Louis Armstrong plays W.C. Handy, and this is,
Man, that's a
you know, look at all the songs on them. St. Louis Blues.
Oh yeah.
You got Long Gone, Memphis Blues, Beale Street
Street.
Blues.
Uh-huh.
I mean, it's got Atlanta Blues, Loveless Love, and that's, to me, it's just a fun record, and I still listen to it a lot. I probably have like 5 copies of this.
Yeah, that's
on
it's a
record.
beautiful album right there.
So yeah,
Now going back to Tiger Rag, he covered it at one point, I think in 29, and that song became a huge hit. But what's interesting about that song is it kind of died off after the 50s. Like for the swing era, Benny Goodman covered it, and then Duke Ellington did a version. But there was really nothing with the song until Charlie Parker did a bebop version of it. Yeah. So that's one. If you guys want to like search something really unique with Tiger Rag, just Google Charlie Parker Tiger Rag. But the song lives on, and do you know how it lives on today?
how is that?
So if you're an LSU fan,
Okay.
that's their pregame song. That's their touchdown
Oh, okay,
song.
right, okay.
Because they're the
Yeah.
LSU Tigers. Guess who else uses it here in Alabama? We should know this. Auburn.
Okay,
The Auburn
yeah.
Tigers as well as Clemson. So that
Interesting.
song going
Yeah,
back
it
100
keeps,
years is still thriving in football stadiums today.
Yeah, and you've got a little bit of background with New Orleans, right? I mean,
Yeah. I spent 5 years down there. Some of the best years of my life. Just, you know, I can't say enough about it. I love the city. I met my wife down there, so I know what it means to miss New Orleans when that's where you left your heart. And that's a great song, by the way, Harry Connick Jr. covers. So some of these modern players from New Orleans, you guys should check out. Kermit Ruffins is one. Of course, the Marsalises.
Yeah, Winton. I want to point out, because as much of a bebop fan as we are,
Yeah, straight
and,
ahead.
you know,
yeah.
straight ahead jazz, hard bop, whatever you, as well, and as impressive as those trumpet players are, Lee Morgan and all these, you know, other guys that we admire. But when Wynton Marsalis, who played a lot of that stuff, he said when he went back to try to play what Louis Armstrong played, he couldn't play it. He had a hard time
that's
playing it.
interesting. Yeah.
It was a completely different, and it was challenging to be able to play how Louis played, because a lot of people, unfortunately, a lot of people that are big bebop fans, and of course we are, they kind of look down on, for some reason, I don't know why, but they look down on Louis Armstrong.
Yeah.
And they don't think that he's a good player, and he was a damn good player.
It's a great point.
And again, Dizzy himself said, I would never have been able to play trumpet if it wasn't for Louis Armstrong.
Louis Armstrong.
And he used to get upset when people used to talk bad about Louis Armstrong as
Yeah.
well. But I just want to kind of point that out,
That's
because
really
I think a lot of people, like, you may or may not have, you may not like the New Orleans style maybe as much as bebop or whatever, but you have to give credit where credit's due.
For sure,
so.
you can't knock Louis, but I wonder if that's because he became so mainstream. He was like a world smash.
Yeah, and he had to pay for
Everybody
that.
knew.
He had to pay for that. Like Dizzy said, that people don't know how much that guy suffered to do that.
From getting to those levels.
Yeah, because he was the one that really also helped break through the racial barriers.
Yeah, that's right. And then
In pretty much a non-confrontational way. Although, but there are stories where
Really good
he
point.
put his foot down. So, anyways, I think that we have to look at that and give credit where credit's due.
for sure. So that's interesting that Wynton had trouble
He said it's very challenging.
creating that
because
type of
completely
style
different
and
feel.
sound.
Yeah, different feel, different
and
sound,
Wynton's
different
done every style of jazz there is,
Yeah.
and he's really been an innovator and one of the modern heroes of preserving jazz and keeping it going.
Yeah.
Jazz education, and that's his whole family. His dad Ellis, of course, that's who taught Harry Connick Jr. to play piano.
Okay.
Harry
I
learned
didn't know
from
that.
Ellis.
All right.
There is a name I just thought of that we should really mention in this conversation, and that's Louis Prima.
Okay. Yeah.
So yeah, Louis Prima was from New Orleans East. There's a street named after him today down there. But you know, Prima became a huge success in the 50s, 60s, and he gave it almost an Italian style to the New Orleans style. So he did songs like Angelina, and he covered like Basin Street Blues. He brought a lot of the earlier jazz back to the mainstream arena.
Right.
Yeah.
And Wynton's been carrying on that tradition, kind of keeping that traditional jazz element alive, you know, and so.
And all his brothers, Jason, the drummer, Branford, and Delfio.
You ran.
I studied with
right,
Jason a bit, at Loyola when he was down there. I got to see him and his dad play. There's a place called Snug Harbor. If you're down there, that's the place to see jazz. Preservation Hall. Kermit has a place, mother-in-law. But you go down to New Orleans, you're not gonna, you can't escape from the jazz if you try. And that's a good thing.
Or do we want to play the Tiger Rag?
Yeah,
wanna play that?
let's,
I'll go take off the record here, and then we can listen to a little bit of that and kind of talk about it.
Yeah, that's
real quick before we close out.
Sounds good. Let's see what we got. So this is the Preservation Hall Jazz Band, and that's a must stop if you're in New Orleans and you want to hear great jazz any night of the week. But a word from our sponsors, gotta get that in.
Give it free advertising.
All right, here it is, Tiger Rag. So very upbeat, very ragtimey, very energetic.
And this is who's playing this?
This is Preservation Hall Jazz.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. Yep. Clarinet coming in there. This is where everybody says, "Hey, jazz hands." I think this song you almost want to do jazz hands when you hear the Tiger Rag.
And that's also another interesting development is adding in these other instruments, because you didn't have.
That's right.
You had a cornet, which Buddy Bolden wasn't. It wasn't really a trumpet. It was a cornet. They're very similar, obviously.
Yeah.
But you got the development of the trumpet itself out of Louis Armstrong and Bun Johnson and guys like that.
Right. The instruments themselves evolved from the music.
And then adding in more elaborate, orchestrations.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Hold that tiger. Hold that tiger by the tail. So that's, jazz has always had a bit of a countercultural edge to it. This song is no different.
All right, well.
Yeah. Well, we'll leave them on Tiger Rag.
We'll leave it on Tiger Rag. You guys have a good one. We'll be doing other episodes on different topics concerning jazz. Whether it be particular albums or time periods or different types of jazz. There's so much that we can
delve into. So and let us know if there's something you want us to touch upon. If there's certain albums you want us to discuss, believe me, Matt most likely has it in his arsenal.
And then also I'd like to ask you guys to subscribe to us so that we can build up a subscriber base that would help us out in being able to get out more content in other ways as well. So we would appreciate
spread the word.
that.
Jazz nerds.
All right, you guys take care. We'll talk to you next time.
Thanks, guys. Peace out.